As was mentioned earlier, an issue that's really introduced in a partitioned workload architecture where I've got multiple systems running different parts of my application is the idea of transient faults, right? Faults that are typically caused by some kind of delay in timeout, unavailability due to load at a particular part within the application. Whatever the reason is, you've got these things where I've got a fault that occurs, and if I simply retry, that fault may not occur. Now, the thing is, you have to deal with this within your applications, but you have to deal with it effectively and intelligently, right? What you would not want to do is every time you make a call, let's say to a service or any kind of communication, you simply put in a try-catch block and you wrap that inside of a do loop with some kind of flag trigger that says, okay, keep running this loop as is forever until it's successful. That would certainly be a brute force way of doing it, but that's not really an effective way of writing your code. You need some kind of pattern that's going to make sense, and that's what the retry pattern is really all about, right? And this is a pattern that's actually encoded in existing libraries. The enterprise library I mentioned earlier has the retry pattern encoded in it. If you don't want to use that, it's not hard to conceptualize the idea of a retry pattern. You just want to go ahead and implement it, right? And the idea, again, is pretty simple. You are assuming that faults are transient, but this is also important until they exceed some kind of retry policy, right? And this goes back to, I wouldn't want to just have a do loop that just runs until, runs 10 million times until somebody shuts down the application or it succeeds. You want to have a logical policy. How many retries do you get before this is considered an actual failure? Right? And I mentioned the transient fault handling block, which is part of the enterprise library, is designed to implement this and to make it easier to implement. Also, the entity framework actually has retry policy built in as of the entity framework version 6.0. So if you are using, and the entity framework, if you're not familiar with it, is, I'm going to be a little bit less than completely professional here. It is completely amazing. I love using the entity framework when I am interacting with data. All right, sorry, nothing to do with the course, but it is very cool stuff. Great way to interact with data, and it's got a lot of functionality, including its own retry policy built in. Just make sure you're using at least version 6.0 if you want to implement that functionality. So the long and the short of this is, my unprofessionalism aside, that you want to make sure that if you are communicating with systems, even if it's not so much system communication, data communication, writing things to storage, that you understand that you have this concept of transient faults. You want to deal with them in a way that minimizes the impact on the user or system experience, and that also, though, has the ability to logically escalate that into a more meaningful error after some kind of retry policy.